Hi everyone, my name is Megan Piazzizi and I'm a CBU student. I am currently getting my master's in social work. So I know you guys are learning about approaches to treatment and therapy, so I really wanted to talk to you guys about some of my experience in behavior therapy. Um, so I will dive right in here for you. Oh, I'll give you a little background. I was getting my undergrad in psychology. So I started off as a social worker assistant. So I was helping out with monitored visits for foster kids. I would make sure, bio parents were behaving appropriately. Just making sure it was a safe environment for the foster kids. I would write reports on my visit. Any concerning things I would note to the case manager at the time. So once I graduated with my BA, I was a therapeutic behavioral coach for about 2 years. So I'll get in a little bit more about what therapeutic behavioral services are. But once I kind of saw the differences in, being an LMFT or going into social work, a lot of my supervisors and colleagues told me to go for my degree in social work because of the broad array of things that you can do with it. So that's why I decided to go ahead and get my master's in the social work. So while I'm in my program, I was able to, and I'm currently doing case management, but I was able to intern as a case manager. So I would go see foster kids on a weekly basis. I would check in with the foster parents, making sure that they got their services that they needed. I would collaborate with county social workers to make sure that, anything that they needed updates on, or if there was any kind of documents that I needed. So really just kind of collaborating with that. And just making sure that their overall well-being, was well and that they were supported. So I've been doing that for about almost 2 years now. And then graduating with the MSW program this May. So yay. Okay, so let me dive into a little bit about behavioral therapy. So there's different areas of behavior therapy. So they're based on the principles of classical and operant conditioning. If you guys are familiar with R.J. Skinner, yes, Skinner and Pavlov. So Skinner was the one that he had the rats, and they would press the lever, they would get a treat. So he kind of did a different array of trials with that. And then Pavlov is the one with the dog and the salivating with the bell. So each time the bell would ring, the dog would start to drool. So those are kind of the basis of behavior therapy, seeing, a response to an intervention. So what kind of TBS does, which is therapeutic behavioral services, they do a lot of more of the behavioral self-monitoring and skills training. So I'll explain that a little bit more. Like I said, so TBS is interventions that target clients that have these extreme behaviors, such as like attention seeking, maybe sexualized behaviors, anger outburst, property damage, self-isolating. So we kind of, really target those that are experiencing high levels of that. If you want some examples of some of the behaviors, if you watch Nanny 911, there's some pretty good examples in there of kind of the clients that TBS coaches will face. And TBS is an evidence-based practice approach. So they do have, they keep track of different behaviors and seeing if they've decreased for the month. So there is, research there. There's numbers. Let's go here. So what do TBS coaches do? So we work one-on-one with clients to develop behavioral skills in areas such as replacement behaviors, social skills, decision-making, reinforcement. We, implement behavior systems. We help with self-regulation. We'll even put stuff in the environment that might help with individuals dealing with their triggers. And then we also promote communication skills. So a lot of times, like with replacement behaviors, if you have a client who's angry and they like to punch the wall or they like to throw things, we've done interventions where we've made like those squishy stress balls. So we actually do an activity where the client actually gets to make their own stress ball. And we talk with them about when they would use it, start to identify some of the triggers that they're knowing that they're reaching that level. So that would be a replacement behavior. We've also done like these little anger boxes with them. So they'll put like different little kind of trinket stuff in there that they can play with to kind of help decrease their anger. So that's a replacement behavior. And I'll get a little bit more into detail on interventions, and I'll show you a couple different ones. So even though we are primarily dealing with the client one-on-one, a big aspect of TBS is you have to have caregiver buy-in. TBS is a therapy that is short-lived, meaning it's usually about 3 to 4 months. They don't really like to go further than that. And if they do, there's usually some other supports in place that would let us know that, hey, maybe TBS might not be the right fit. But you have to have this caregiver buy-in because you're going to transfer the skills that you teach your client to the caregiver so they're, doing it on a daily basis. So you really got to build that rapport. So this is where you get to start to see a system. You're working with a system, not just the client and their struggles, but you're working with a family dynamic. So even though you're not like traditionally sitting with the family like on a couch or looking at the cognitive areas of what might need to change in the family, you're trying to collaborate with the family on like what is their norms, how is it working for them, what would they like to see differently. So you're really taking this approach as equals and trying to find solutions to better manage some of the behaviors that that their child is experiencing. So, and also when the client is in TBS services, they also have a therapist. So they get to address on the cognitive side of things, what we're kind of reinforcing in skills. So we collaborate with the therapist on a monthly basis as well to kind of see what they're noticing, if they have any other further suggestions, if they've noticed different kind of behaviors or that might work better. So we're really in collaboration with the team. So this is where I really like how it ties into social work, because social work is all about teamwork and collaboration and working with different systems. So here's the systems. So, as mentioned, you begin to work with systems in TBS, and you're not only addressing the child's behavior, but the family dynamic as well. This can be done through behavior charts, changing the parents' behavior through interventions as well. We have caregiver interventions that we're allowed to do. Because it is primarily one-on-one with the client, we're only allowed to do like 1 or 2 interventions with the caregiver. But a lot of times what I like to do is have the caregiver come into the other interventions and help teach them to teach their kid. So, there's little things around that as well. But a lot of times, I don't know if you notice, like something that I've noticed a lot when I'm dealing with caregivers is, they'll yell at their kid like, hey, go do that. But then the kid will like yell back at them and they're like, well, don't yell at me, but you're yelling at them too. So, this social learning kind of theory of I'm only doing what I've learned from you. So that's where we come from, that perspective of now that's what we're trying to change. We're trying to replace that behavior with a more effective, maybe positive one, where you're using a soft tone, where you're, exercising some patience. So that becomes tricky with caregivers as well, because a lot of them come with the mindset of, well, because I said. So we try and explain. We give a lot of psychoeducation on what works and what the research tells us too. So that sometimes helps. So again, you're working with a lot of different systems, with therapists, with supervisors, with the family, and the client as well. Another cool thing I like about social work is there's so many different areas you can go in with it. And this is kind of what opened my eyes when I was doing TBS, was I would start to see clients needing more services, like the family would need more services than what I could provide. So I'd always kind of hit this wall of, with what my role was. So social work really opens this up as, because if you're in case management, you can connect them to different resources. So you're really like a broker. Also, if you're a social worker, you're, following them through longer periods of time than what TBS can do. So you're doing more case management. And then Also, you're looking at their environment. Is there things in place that are preventing them from being able to reach, that ultimate goal? So then you have policy that you can advocate for at the local and state level. So that's kind of really what the route I want to go in, making bigger macro change. But social work, if you still want to do like more therapy, you can totally do that with social work. And then if you decide you don't want to do therapy anymore, you can jump somewhere else. So that's what's cool about social work. You can do many different things. And I actually took this picture in my first class. It was my generalist class, first semester. So yeah, there's tons of different things you can do with social work. So getting back to kind of like what TBS does and what kind of interventions, behavior interventions that we'd actually implemented, this is one I like to use a lot because it helps with kids understand boundaries and social skills. So normally we have a lesson plan coming into the session, and these are usually hands-on activities. They're games, they're interactive, they're meant to be entertaining for your client, but they're also teachable so that they're learning from these fun activities. So we do a lot of those hands-on activities. So this intervention is called boundary bubbles. So this is in the area of social skills, which I'll show you later, all the different areas of skills that we do, but for this one, we'll talk about social skills. So it tells you what I need for this to teach this intervention. It talks about the coach will describe the importance of the social skill of maintaining one's own personal space and respecting others' personal space. The coach will use the bubble string wand to provide a visual representation of personal space. So this is really good for little kids because, you can sit there and you can talk with them like, hey, you can't just go up to strangers and give them a hug, which a lot of our clients do because they don't understand the boundaries. So this gives a visual representation of like everyone has their bubble. And in order to come in someone's bubble, we have to ask permission. So, they start to recognize, oh, I have to ask permission with a bubble. So everyone has their own little personal space bubble. So that's kind of how this intervention works. You're teaching them that skill with a visual representation. And then there's a section there that talks about the documentation, which is a huge, huge part of TBS. Documentation is sometimes tedious and long, but let me tell you, it has helped me enormously in my writing skills. If you can do TBS notes, you can do any other notes out there. They are long and they are very detail-oriented, but as soon as you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy. But yeah, that's one aspect. And then again, with these interventions, sometimes we have to, do these interventions more than once. We don't like to do them like back to back, but, we'll spread them out within the month just to remind them and refresh them. But there's interventions that are still in that same category of intervention focus of social skills. So you're still, you're building the foundation, the blocks of social skills, and you're still reminding them of boundaries in different ways. Let me see if I have a chart. If there's other interventions that will go along with this. So also talking about how I was telling you about documentation, I'm going to pull up this note a little bit bigger so you can kind of see. Okay. So this is an actual note. So this is some of the target behaviors that this client has experienced. So before TBS coaches actually go in, there's a supervisor who is a LMFT, licensed marriage family therapist, or an LCSW, licensed clinical social worker. So they go in, they do an assessment, they get the referral from the therapist. So they discuss all these different kind of triggers, how often it's happening. So this is this is kind of our foundation of like what we need to address. So this particular client had oppositional behaviors. It defines it very clearly as like talking back, ignores directives, steals, doesn't complete tasks when they are assigned, breaks the rules, runs away, and argues. So each time I go into session, I'm looking for those key areas or those key behaviors that my client engages in, and then I'm going to be tallying it over here, and I'll get to that in a minute. And then again, you can see he has a lot of different behaviors. He has anger outbursts, sexualized behaviors, and enuresis and encopresis. So anytime those kind of behaviors are engaged in, you tally them here. So when I go into session, I ask the caregivers how many times has that happened, before our last session. So they would tell me how many times. I'm counting as well as in session. So this area here, this is what goes on our quarterly progress to see where we're making improvements on, maybe where we're not making improvements on, so that can better help tailor what we're going to do, moving forward. So here, down here, this is the actual intervention skills that we use. So adjustment to the physical setting. We identify like a safe space, like homework space. Like a lot of times, kids don't like to focus on their homework, or a lot of times when we come in the home, they just are sitting on the table. So we make a fun kind of little place for them that they just go for their homework. That's the only time they go there for their homework. So that sometimes helps. Creating a calming kit, so that sometimes like with little trinkets, like a lot of our clients might be on the spectrum, so we like to use different kind of texture little items that help them kind of relax during different tasks. So there's other things, communication skill building, so using appropriate language and tone, using I statements, and making assertive requests. So a lot of times what I do for communication skills is I do modeling, which is probably the biggest intervention that we use. It's just you're showing them how to engage in that. So I'll ask them a request in a nice and appropriate tone and appropriate language, and the parents will, also engage in that as well. So they'll use quiet tone. They'll maybe ask them, give them 2 different prompts. So they're modeling it. So this comes back to that social learning theory that I was talking about, how we're actually seeing the behavior and that we're actually able to learn that way too. So it's kind of cool. So yeah, other different little areas, self-regulation. So this is like starting to identify what triggers them. So clients will have activities where we'll play games and they have to talk about a trigger, like what makes you mad. And they'll say, when my mom yells at me. Okay, so mom yells at you. How can we not get to that high angry level? I can ask her nicely with a assertive request that I don't like that, or I can go to my room for 5 minutes and then come back out. So we use a lot of different techniques like that. And then, so after we've done the skills, I'll kind of show you how, is it this one? Oh, this is more skills. Okay, so here is the bulk of how notes look like. Yeah, these are pretty extensive. But the cool part is me coming in and reading this, I can know exactly how my session went. How did the intervention go? Was my client responsive to it? So like this one, coach engaged client in a hands-on activity of building blocks to help build rapport as well as introduce replacement behaviors. Coach gave client some assistance when he asked. Coach prompted client with questions such as, what do you like to play with when you're bored? Coach had to give client assistance in identifying other hands-on activities when client engaged in sexualized behaviors. So this is an in-session intervention. So this oftentimes happens as well. So you'll go into the session with your planned intervention and your client's engaging in one of your behaviors. So you're not going to ignore the behavior. You're going to intervene immediately. So it's your crisis intervention. So when he did engage in that sexualized behavior, I suggested client take a bathroom break to redirect client's behavior. So I'm redirecting him. I'm not like shaming him. I'm not scolding him. I'm just redirecting him. Hey, let's go use the restroom. So you're doing it in a more positive way, but you're stating that this behavior is not going to be allowed. So that's kind of an in-crisis intervention, just redirection. And a lot of times we do that too with replacement behavior. So if they're angry, we redirect them to either their safe spot or their anger box that we've created with them. So there's a lot of different ways you can do in-crisis interventions too with behaviors. So that's all of that. Let me show you a little bit more of the interventions we've done. So this one, see if it'll load. So this one I like to use a lot because you can change it in so many different ways. And the kids like this because they get M&Ms. So you bring them a bag of M&Ms and you do, the coach has a bag of M&Ms and they have a little bag of M&Ms. So they pick out a color. So each color means something. So they talk about things that make me mad or irritated. So this is more about self-regulation, identifying their triggers. Things that I'm good at, this is more of like that positive reinforcement. So yeah, you can change these anyway. Like I'll do it with, tell me a time that made you angry and you used an I, or what would you do? And then we would talk about I statements or sort of requests or replacement behaviors that, they began to develop. So we use this intervention a lot. Even when we're building a report, we like to do like what makes you happy, what makes you sad. So, we'll get to know our clients this way too. So that one's a really fun intervention. And with TBS, you could be so creative. Like I've had clients that have loved like SpongeBob and I've made things SpongeBob related, or I've had clients that like Marvel, so I've made things superhero related. So you really want to tailor the interventions to what their interests are, because they're more likely to absorb that information because it's something of their interest. So it's really fun. Then you get to make a lot of crafts. Let's see. So this is one I've done with caregivers before, and this is a consequence calculator. So a lot of times parents, they're not very consistent in the disciplinary area of certain actions. So I talked to them about establishing like your house rules. What behaviors do you want to see in your home, or what behaviors are you not going to allow in your home? So based on kind of these house rules, we look at, the frequency, the mindset, and the risk. And then this kind of gives you your overall calculator of what consequence will be given. So parents come up with their minor consequences, their medium consequences, and their major consequences. So that can be some of the minor consequences I've seen was, you don't get to play with that toy for 5 minutes, or you can't do the next activity if you don't clean up this toy first. So those are kind of those minor consequences. The medium ones, they may, I've seen them take points away off their behavior chart, or I've seen them actually not take away points on their behavior chart. They more so will lose like a privilege, like TV time, or maybe a certain treat that they were supposed to get that day. And then the major consequences have been like more like the events, like, you don't get to go to that friend's, get together, or you don't get to go over to play today. So those are your major consequences that I've seen. So the parent will kind of evaluate like how many times has this misbehavior happened? What was the attitude of, their kid? Was it more of like, did they forget? Because, kids are kids. They're going to forget sometimes. They're going to forget the rules. Or was it more of being willfully defiant? So, you have to do that too. And then how risky was the misbehavior? Was it physically harmful? Was it emotionally harmful? Or was it illegal? So based on your kind of score, it will kind of help you decide which consequence to give. So that one was kind of cool. And then here are some other ones. So this is a behavior chart. So we've seen in research that tells us that when you do positive reinforcement, it's more likely to change the behavior. So we like to do a lot of more incentives more than consequences. So anytime that the kid gets points for doing certain things, they can earn maybe different levels of, incentives based on their interests. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. It's really a lot about trial and error with behaviors as well. You'll start to see some consistency, and then the client kind of gets bored after a while, or they expect it too much, so then they kind of don't respond. So then that's when we tailor things. We switch things around, which you can mostly do with all of our interventions. So yeah, those are kind of cool. Yeah, so if you guys have any questions, or if you guys want to know about more TBS, feel free to reach out to me. Let's see if I can even put my email on here. I should have wrote this down. I have a really long email. But feel free to reach me at my email. Well, thank you guys for letting me talk with you a little bit about what behavioral therapy is. If you guys, like I said, if you guys have questions more about it, feel free to email me. I'm happy to help. But you guys have a great day.